Hey, this is Noogie from GroWardingTalesGuides.com, and we're going to go over kind of how to eke out some raid damage here. Like, in fact, the last bit of raid damage, the big chunky stuff. So the basic premise of this video is a little backstory, right? So I used to, when I was raiding before, maybe like a year or so ago, there was this guy that joined our Discord, and we ended up just chatting with him for over the course of a few months or whatever. And eventually, he's just kind of a staple person, would just come and talk with us. Eventually, he chatted me up and he's like, "Hey, I kind of want to join your guild." Now, keep in mind, my position in my guild, I think I was doing like 400 million damage. I was considerably over anybody else in my guild, and I was feeling pretty good about that. So I go, "Well, what kind of damage do you do, man?" And he goes, I did 625 last raid. I'm like, "What? What'd you just say?" Which was so much better than what I was doing. I was like, "That, what? Are you serious?" And like, I won't bore you with the details of why I didn't let him in the guild, which may sound crazy to you, but more so along the lines of, what is it? Um, I don't know. He was too good to be in the guild. He would have been unhappy and eventually left when he did that to the guild that he joined. So, but that's fine, right? But my point is, like, I was just so enamored by the fact that he was killing it, killing the damage. I was like, what? How are you doing that? So it kind of became my little goal, my little obsession to find out how to get from 400 to 600 or whatever it was. I wrote a guide about it, like. But the main thing here, and like I've come to understand what it takes to get from there to there, and and I see people still come in. Like we have this guy in our guild. He's this younger guy, and he pops in, like pop in like a whirlwind, and he's like, "Hey boss," and he calls me boss, and he's like, "Hey guys, hey boss, this guy just did 1.5 billion or like yeah 1.1 billion damage or whatever it is," and he's like, "Yeah, discuss how to do that, man. How do we figure out how to do that?" And then he'll like leave. He'll just like pop off. You're like, what the hell was that? But like I know how to get there, but it's never what you think. Like it kind of feels like some people think it's like a diet pill, right? Like I take this one pill, it's gonna be all good. It's my simple solution to kick ass, and that's just not how that works, right? But I'm gonna go over why and how it does work and how to get you there, right? So um, the biggest misconception here is that it's stat based. It helps. I mean, don't get me wrong. It helps not only, I mean, it helps your damage when you get attack bonus, and it helps your ego because you're like, I'm not doing that damage. Well, it's because of my stats, which is true, but it's also an excuse, right? And it was for me because I couldn't get over the fact that this guy was just that much better of a player than I was. I was like, you son of a, all right, whatever. I'll just focus on attack bonus, and I did for a while, right? And then when I got it up, and I'm like, okay, I'm still not anywhere close to this guy. It's just because he's a better player, and he just perceives the game differently. Like another misconception here is that I'm not a great player. I'm a strong player with a very strong account, but I'm not a great player. Like I put up 900 million last raid, and I'm sure like if I hit the high damage bosses throughout the raid, I can make like maybe 950, 960. That sounds crazy, right? That damage sounds insane compared to what some of y'all are doing. But I know what I could do because other people are doing it, and I'm totally capable. Our accounts aren't very far off at all. Like our accounts are very similar, but they're still putting up 100 million more than me. And so it's like how, and it's all consistency. They can put up 1 to 1.5 million damage more than I can per attempt, and they just consistently do it. And that's what makes a great player great, is that consistency. So because you got 14 days and 3 attempts per day, right? So 1.5 million per fight, which sounds chill. That sounds not that bad, but that's 5 million a day almost, right? 5 million times 14, that's some stiff numbers. That's getting up there. And then in addition to that, like you've got the first days, right? Whereas though I might put up like 90, they might put up 105 because they're just so much better, right? So we're going to go over how to get from A to B, how to get there, right? So a lot of it's like, I'm going to go ahead and say itemization, but it is and it isn't, right? Like, so you need to have good itemization. I'm assuming that if you're doing 700 million damage, you have pretty decent itemization. You're doing, right? Now keep in mind, this video, by the way, just setting this aside, this video is not just for like people that do crazy damage already and they want to do crazy Moorish damage. This is for virtually everybody. If you don't do crazy damage, I guarantee this guide is going to help you more than any one thing I've ever done, just because you'll think of it differently. You'll look at things differently. And that's what we need to do to get from that to that, right? So that being said, itemization, I'm going to assume that you're on the right track. Guardian Tales is very simplistic with itemization. It's not very dynamic. It's not very complex. Until relics, there wasn't really a choice. You just do it. Like skill damage cards on the leader, crit damage on your second highest, crit and attack on your third, and then goofy attack cards on your last, which is usually an off-element member, off-element weapons with elemental advantage, yada, 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 right? It doesn't really matter. That stuff's all obvious. And if you watch my other guides, it should spell all that out. So I assume that you're already doing that. Now, these are the parts that are important, right? Research. Research is absolutely massive, right? This is the first raid this season right now that we had that we weren't able to grab the information from the KR first because of the flood they had. I mean, God, how selfish are they having a flood during a raid season? Seriously? Come on now. Well, whatever. So we had to research all the stuff ourselves, find out the right teams, right matrices, so on and so forth. So that happened this raid, and it happened on a Saturday. Well, nobody really realized it was going to happen, but whatever. But research is like knowing exactly what teams, knowing how your teams may shift throughout the season, right? So, for example, what do we have right now? Panda. Panda, if you're using range dark, like at the beginning of the season, you could use like, Claude, Ogma, Arabelle, and Nari to get really, really good damage, like 35 million, kind of really great damage. And then as the season went on and the bosses get more thick, like Panda will pound on Ogma into the ground, actually, and can almost kill him. So depending on how progressed your defense is on your account, you may have to switch to, instead of Arabelle and Nari, to Cam and Tinia to keep Ogma alive for the fight. So just knowing that component can and may change throughout the raid is big. That's the research component, right? That's one of them. Knowing who to use, knowing the fact that if you took Nari and put him on that team, you can't do basic, right? So just setting everything up, just having an idea of how it works. And then just knowing what skills work with what, so in other words, if you're chaining, right, like you understand that Nari should theoretically go before Garen because Nari gives a crit bonus and Garen works off of that. That's research, right? Just knowing what your characters do, what they're capable of, and how to eke out more and more and more damage. So that's kind of the research aspect, which will pop up throughout this conversation as I'm going on because it's just a big component. In addition to that, like when you watch videos, part of your research is watching videos. Everybody should be watching videos if they care about their damage, right? If you're not watching a video, then you just don't have time for it. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. Like, I have so little time to do this Guardian Tale stuff, and yet I'm here because I'm just drawn to it. I like the game. It's fun. So it's more of a personal time to make these videos than it is business, right? Which is the other 3 monitors on my face, right? So, but that being said, watching the videos, you understand the chain timings, you understand this, you understand that. The chain timings, honestly, is the easiest thing to improve your damage if you're slightly getting it wrong, right? It just makes such a big difference. Like 1.5 versus 0.8 could be 1 million damage. Just the way it works, like that's just all in the way it works. So knowing those timings is maybe experimenting a little bit, but probably watching videos. So while you're watching videos, though, while you're doing that research, you're watching the chain timings, obviously, like we just talked about. But the other things, this is where the next big boost you're going to get because you probably weren't looking for this stuff. The other things you're looking for is positioning. This is huge, right? First and foremost, movement basically reduces your overall damage. When people have to walk, they don't necessarily attack, right? When people have to move to the boss, they're moving, not fighting, right? We don't want to move at all. We want the boss to stand still. So any fight you can do to have the boss stand still is superb. Like Panda, you totally have the ability past the first 5 seconds of the fight or whatever to have the boss stand still for the entire fight. So it just turns into RNG and lacking of strategy. That's totally fine. That's exactly what you want all fights to do. But other fights, let's say like Ancient Demon this season, you lead with Veronica, right? Garam's gonna get aggro, so that's a movement-based fight. He is gonna move, right? So when you're watching the videos, pay attention to how the player moves the characters, right? So, like the first time you really noticed this, at least that I did, you'd see things like Garam kind of, rather than moving back, he'd circle around his team. He'd move Ancient Demon between him and his team as he went around the outer edges, because we want the team to be in the middle. We want them to be really close to Demon. And Garam in the important bits would get inside of his team so he get all the buffs. Right? So if everybody's spread out, it's less advantageous to your overall damage because some of the buffs may be range specific, right? Especially Veronica. So like your positioning and how you move the boss around the level, how you move your heroes, right? Like Veronica, she has if you're leading with Veronica, she has a little crit buff, right? So she can drop it off in the group, but you need to be close to them. So you need to make sure your movement includes them in the buff while body blocking the boss or whatever it is. And while you watch these videos, you may just be looking at the damage, but that's the least important part. These people, like especially on our site, we show people that do good damage. We don't show people that do meh damage. And that's just because you need to be the people that do meh damage probably don't execute the strategy properly. The people that do hardcore damage really put too much time into it. They have no lives. Welcome to the club, right? So they probably do a pretty good strategy. That's the only thing you really care about. Watch the movement, watch the positioning of the bosses, watch the positioning of the heroes. Just understand it better. Those are huge. Positioning, chain timings, that's what you get out of the videos, right? Now the next part, practice. Practice is the next step. It's the biggest thing right now. Practice is, I'm going to break it down real quick. Practice is a whole bunch of things. Like the first tier of practice is just practice the boss to understand the mechanics. And I know some of them you already know, but like I saw, we put in a vote on our Discord, like, hey, Contact Guardian Tales, say we want more diversity with the elements on each bosses because we're getting tired of fighting the same bosses with the same elements. It's boring. And I remember somebody like, we just need new bosses. Like it's just boring doing it's even if you change the lead, you're not learning a new fight, which you do. You have to relearn the entire fight if you're changing your lead. You do. You know all the dynamics, but you don't know the exact timings that's going to bring your damage from 20 million to 21 million. You don't know those things. Those are the things that you need to pay attention to. So if you've never used Tenia for Ancient Demon or whatever it is, and that's your new lead, step up. You're going to learn it. You need to push it. Anybody that says the lead doesn't change the dynamics simply doesn't raid hard enough. Or they raid within their schedule's allowance, but they don't care enough. They're not excited about it. That's totally fine. But that's not for my peeps, right? So when you watch the videos, or when you're practicing, practice isn't a dozen times. Practice is a few dozen times. Put up 40 attempts, 50 attempts. Play with it. Understand your damage. Like every time you do damage to a boss and you finish attempt, write it down. Oh, I did 14.5, 14.2, 14.6, 13.8. Understand after 10 attempts, you'll know with the same exact strategy, because you can only start writing it down once you actually execute the strategy properly and consistently. Then you start writing your damage down. You're like, oh, wow, okay, I'm doing 14 on average, but my highs are 12.9, but I did get, that's my low, but my high might be 15.6. Just understand those things, right? That's your practice. Like, just get it to the point where it's instinctual. Like, you'll never have to practice during the season sometimes. Like, if you just know, just boom, 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 right? All right, cool. I got it. I know exactly what I got to do. Now, that's one aspect of practice, just knowing the fight, becoming instinctual with what you have to do. That's why I do all these recordings of the KR, right? It doesn't really matter what my damage is. It just matters if I'm executing the strategy properly. That's it, right? So that being said, the other thing you got to do is you practice during the season. Every day you should practice at least 3 or 4 times before a fight. And the reason why is simple, right? So let's say on day 2, the boss is level 78. And I'm hitting this boss consistently for 20 million. All right, sounds real good. But the next day, the boss it went from 78 to 81. And then without practicing, I don't know what my average damage is. So I don't know what the lows are, and I don't know what the highs are. If you really care about your damage, you're going to go in and you're going to practice a few times, understand your high and low, and then hit it. And if the RNG doesn't give you a good damage while executing your strategy properly, then retry it. Because if you don't know the boundaries of your damage, each day when the level changes, you could be getting bad DPS. You could be getting bad damage, and the retry will save you from that. And you really got to do that every single time. All those things, when you factor them in together, when you really pay attention to it, you start to actually pull up some good numbers, right? You start to improve your numbers and all that. Just imparting a few things that I'll say, right? Like when you see a person do like crazy damage in a single practice run, don't look at that and say, I can do that every time, because they don't do that every time. It was special enough to make the video that they have to show you how well they did. You don't know how many like hundreds of runs that went into that amazing score, because it's just fun to do the practices sometimes. But they'll record videos or whatever. So just understand that whenever they put up like 25 million on something you're putting up 22 million on, that just means they had really good RNG, and maybe they consistently put up more than you, but it's not a huge amount. It's not. Nobody should be getting those 26s all the time, whatever it is. But if you factor in all these things and you make yourself better, the thing that makes you different than everybody else, that makes a great player versus a strong player better, is consistency. Getting that 5 million more a day than the next guy, that's like 1.5 per fight, doing 1 million more per attempt than the next guy, right? Which doesn't sound like much, but if you keep doing that 1 million more with a few highs, maybe 2 million, that's what differentiates you from everybody else out there. And all these little things, you add them up, you become a better player. You get in the mindset, you start paying attention to things that you didn't really know existed, like positioning and how you keep the boss away from, like how you group up your bunch, or you group up your teammates by moving the boss around you instead of through them. Like that's what's going to get you that heavy damage. So hopefully all this stuff works and you retain it, and you get some killer damage, and maybe you can tell me, pop in the Discord, say how much you've become a badass, and I'll be proud of you. I think it's awesome. Go through that process like some of us have done, and just get there yourself. All right, Noogie out.